Hi Padel drivers, how you doing? I'm Gonzalo, the coach of Rocket Padel Bristol, the biggest padel center of the UK, and today we're going to be talking on how to choose your paddle racket. Vamos! Every day I get so many questions on which paddle racket I should choose. I know it's a quite complex topic, so hopefully we can teach you something today that helps you choose the best racket possible. We're going to be talking about the different aspects that you need to take into account, and the first one, in my opinion, and most important one, is the shape of the racket. So I'm going to be grabbing the Starbit Triton Pro, for example, the Hook Platinum White, and the Bull Padel Ionic. So as you can see, we have very different shapes in these rackets. The Starbit Triton Pro is a pure diamond shape, okay? You can see it's kind of a inverted triangle. So all the weight is going to be distributed on the top end of the racket. Then you have the Platinum White, which is completely rounded, okay? So in this case, the balance of the racket would be closer to the hand. And then you have the Ionic Light from Bull Padel. This is something in between the previous two that we have just mentioned. Okay, so what does this mean? The balance of the racket has to do with the distribution of the weight. So for example, in this one we said it was a diamond, so you can see there is a lot of mass of the racket that is going to be around the top end of the racket, so this is gonna make the racket feel quite heavy. Advantages of having a diamond shape is gonna be really good whenever we're doing overheads, okay? So everything that requires to accelerate the tip of the racket is gonna help us with that acceleration. But on the other end, when we are at the net, okay, and I'm doing this kind of motion with the volley that I need to move the racket very fast, it's gonna be quite bad, okay? So the maneuverability with that top heavy racket is way worse than if I take a rounded racket. However, with a rounded racket, it's completely the opposite. It's going to be way more maneuverable. So when I'm at the net and I'm doing this kind of motion, you're gonna feel that it's way easier to move the racket. However, on the other end, whenever you are playing those overheads and you're trying to accelerate the tip of the racket, you're gonna miss a little bit of power, okay? So completely the opposite to the top heavy racket. And that's why you will see many players going for the hybrid shape, because it gives you a little bit of both worlds. You're gonna have that power, and at the same time you're also going to have that control and that maneuverability. You're going to have that acceleration of the tip of the racket when you are playing overheads, and at the same time it's quite maneuverable, okay? So up to you. Maybe you want to go for a top heavy racket if you are a really offensive player and you finish a lot of points with the overheads, and on the other hand, maybe you want to go for more hybrid or more rounded if you feel that you need that help moving the racket at the net. The second factor that you have to take into account when choosing your racket, and for me is super important, is the weight of the racket. This can go from 340 grams to 380, more or less. Similar to what we explained before, if you choose a very heavy racket, it's going to help you with those powerful shots, but at the same time, it's going to be harder to move. Secondly, if you play with a very heavy racket, it's more likely that you get injured, because if you are not used to the strength that it requires to move this racket, you might have elbow problems or you might have shoulder problems. So if you are someone that doesn't play as much or you don't have the strength required to move a 380 grams racket, it's perfectly fine to go for something lighter. This is a very typical mistake, because you will see many pros playing with heavy rackets, but what you need to understand is that they are professionals. They are training every day, they have a physical preparator, and they are able to move these rackets. But again, this is not something for everyone. So my recommendation, if you're an amateur player, go more for those rackets that are around 360 grams. For me, that's the perfect weight. And the third factor that we have to take into account is materials. This can get quite complex, but we're gonna try to keep it easy for everyone. So I'm heading to the shop so that you can see different rackets with different materials, but what we need to understand here is that the two main materials that we have is, first, carbon fiber, and second one, fiberglass. So the fiberglass is more elastic, the carbon fiber is more rigid, and you have probably seen this K factor in the paddle rackets. So we have 3K, 12K and 18K, and there is a lot of controversy about this one, because you will see that some people say 3K is harder and 18K is more flexible, but the truth is that it really depends on the density of the carbon as well, and I feel nobody talks about this. So how can we see which material we have? So, in the carbon fiber rackets, you will see that the rackets has some squares, okay? So depending on the size of the square, you can tell which K carbon is using. So I have these three. Okay, so you will see that this one is 3K carbon because it has very small squares. You can almost see them. But on the other hand, you can see that these squares, this is 18K, these squares are way larger. And then in between you have carbon 12K, which looks something like this. Does it mean that 18K is better than 3K? Not necessarily. The only thing that I can tell you is that 18K is more expensive than 12K and 12K is more expensive than 3K. So forget everything about what I said. To keep it simple, if you play more than once a week, I would go for a carbon fiber racket because it's gonna last longer. If you are a beginner or intermediate player that you are still trying to find out if you like the sport, you might want to go for a fiberglass racket. First, because it's going to be cheaper, and second, because it's more elastic and it's going to help you a little bit when you are playing at low speed. And factor number 4 that we have to take into account, quite technical this one, is the foam. I have to go back to the court, but in the meantime, super important guys, remember to like and subscribe if you are liking this content because it really helps us bring some more videos. So, for the foam of the racket, I have actually made something super cool so that you can see it more into detail, and is that I have this amazing racket, but so the foam is basically what it goes inside of the layers of carbon, or in this case the fiberglass, and it's going to give that hard feeling or soft feeling when you are hitting the ball. Things to take into account here: if you choose a high density rubber, the feeling of your racket when you are hitting the ball will feel way harder. On the other hand, if you choose a low density foam, you're going to have that trampoline effect more typical in softer rackets. So what's the difference? Harder rackets are more reactive. That means that when you are hitting like smashes or you're playing at really high rhythms, it's gonna help you get in that power, and at the same time it's gonna give you that feeling, okay? So that's why you will see most of the pros going with very high density rubbers. On the other side, if you are a beginner and you typically play at low speeds, you might be interested in a low density or soft racket because it has that trampoline effect where it's helping you push the ball at low speeds. Another thing to take into account here, and I feel almost nobody talks about this, is that the rubber of the racket will get softer and softer with time. It's something also really affected by sudden changes in temperature. So my recommendation, play with a medium density racket because in a few weeks, in a few months, it will tend to go softer. Also, something more technical to take into account is where you live. It's not the same playing in Madrid in summer, 600 meters of altitude, 40 degrees, that the ball is going to fly, and probably you want to take advantage of a harder racket than playing, for example, here in Bristol, UK, sea level, winter, 5 degrees, the ball is gonna feel way heavier. So maybe here in Bristol you want to go for something softer or more towards medium density. And the fifth factor to take into account, for me is quite important, is the grip length. It's not the same playing with a grip that is this long than, for example, playing with this one that is way longer. So what's the difference? First, for those of you who play double-handed backhand, you probably want to go for something that is a little bit longer so that you can put both hands on the grip. Also, it affects the balance of the racket. Rackets with very long grips, they are usually more top-heavy. And at the same time, for me, you have to find a balance in between. So this one is going to allow you to have more surface of your hand grabbing the racket, and the other one might feel like the space that you have to grab the racket is a little bit constrained. Also, where you grip your racket might affect your game style. For example, you will see some pros that they grab the racket very low so that they can generate this, how do you say palanca? Lever force, muy buena, venga, muy buena. The pros for some smashes or overheads, they grip really low to generate this lever force and get more power. But at the same time, you will see some other players that they want to grab the racket a little bit higher. So take into account how you grip the racket to choose whether you want to go for a longer grip or something more compact. A typical example of a short grip could be the Adidas Metal Bond from Ale Galán. On the other hand, a longer grip could be the Air Viper from Juan Lebron. And me personally, I like something in between. So the racket that I use, you can see that is somewhere in between. So it's not too long, but not too short either. Perfect line. So for example, in my case, I play with the Hook Solid, which is a hybrid shape. It has 360 grams weight. Is made of carbon 12K, medium high density rubber, and a grip that is not so long but not too short. So what I like the most about this racket is that it's super balanced in everything. It's not too top heavy, it has good control, super versatile, and I personally love it. If you are interested in hook paddle rackets, you can check them at padeldrivers.com, our shop. That being said, thank you for watching the video, and we will see you in the next one. ¡Vamos!